get started here. I am getting on with my good friend, Kim Jordan. I'm going to invite her on. Let's see if we can't get her to join. Hey guys. Check if you're okay. Kim, you are invited. You should be able to see that. Super excited for you guys to be on here today. So, here we go. She is.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going
Oh
good.
my gosh, so good to see your face.
It's
You
great
are
to see
amazing.
yours.
Oh, I'm so happy.
Can you hear me okay?
So, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. I'm going to turn my volume on my AirPods up just a tiny bit. So, thank you for joining me. This is actually my very first live. You are my very first ever guest on my show. So, I'm super excited for that. Thank you for doing that.
What an honor.
And
Thank you for
today,
asking.
oh,
I'm going to get
it's so
my
awesome.
AirPods.
Yeah, that might help a little bit too. So first and foremost, the adoption connection is just showing how everyone's adopted, we are all connected through adoption, even if we aren't adoptive parents or adoptive kids. We all have a connection, and in the word it actually says in Ephesians 1:5 that we are all adopted into the kingdom of heaven through the blood of Jesus Christ. So that is kind of the premise of how I've started this amazing Instagram. And so now I'm having you on to talk about your journey. So as soon as you get ready, we will begin your story. I'm so excited to hear it all. So,
Okay, I'm getting there. Guess
yeah.
it's something I should have thought of beforehand.
No, girl, it's fine. I'm sitting in a
All
coffee
right,
shop, so people are taking pictures by me.
here
I
we
love
go.
it. All right, girl. So first and foremost, we're both adoptive mamas, and we've talked about this since early on when you were just starting into your journey. We've both kind of been on this journey for a while now, so I'm excited to hear your story. Now, you have adopted your nephew, is that correct?
Yes, he's my nephew. I've had him since he was 3 months old. He is now 9.
Oh my gosh. Now, is he approaching your height yet? Because mine is.
Not quite, but it's not going to be long. I suspect by the time he's 12, he'll be there.
Oh my goodness. So tell me how you came about actually being a mom to him.
So, as you know, Shannon, sometimes you get dealt a hand you weren't really expecting to have. And matter of fact, when I had Zoe, I had my tubes tied because I was done with raising children and having children and all that. And then this cute little fella comes along and he just wasn't in the best environment. And the particular night that it happened, it was December the 11th of 2014. So at that time, he was 3 months old. And my brother wasn't around. He was in the care of the mother. And she decided to go party and left him in the car for hours unattended. And somebody partying with her connected with my dad at like 6 in the morning. And my dad called me. And prior to that, though, I mean, you remember being a new mom, there was no way I was going to let my child like spend the night out. Well, when he was a week old, I had to go get him. So leading up to that, it was tumultuous anyway. So on that day, my dad called and there had been some friction, if you will, over that situation with him being left in the car. And I just went and got him. And, I didn't ask. I just put him in the car and left. And on the Monday, so the Department of Social Services or Child Protective Services they're not open on Fridays, or they weren't at that time, oddly enough. So it had to wait till Monday, and my dad and her sister, the biological mom's sister, both went and reported the situation. So then I got a phone call from Child Protective Services in the county that they're from, and they were like, "Do you have your nephew?" And I was like, "I do," convinced they were about to charge me with kidnapping because, like I said, I didn't ask. And they said, "Well, we've heard we've had some complaints about what's going on. We've looked into it. We think it warrants an investigation. Would you be willing to keep it? And I was like, absolutely. And the oddest question, they said, well, for how long? And I said, until he goes to college, which I thought was the strangest question. But when it turns out, a lot of times kids in this situation, maybe they can only stay the night, or maybe they can only stay the weekend. And I learned that later, because I was like, who would leave a kid hanging like that? But
Many do.
it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody.
So you basically began kind of a foster parenting type of situation in the beginning.
In the beginning, yes. It ended up becoming, here in North Carolina, what is called kinship care.
Okay.
So I was a kinship care provider. And what that meant was I got to skip some of the things that would typically have to happen prior to getting into fostering.
That's wonderful.
Now, they did come and check my house, and did a background check on me like that, but it was kind of after the fact, whereas in fostering, it's done before the fact.
Right. So that's great. So then you have that in place in North Carolina. Now, how do you feel North Carolina is right now with the foster care system and adoption in general?
Well, interestingly, since 2019, our availability in fostering homes has decreased from 20 to 28%, depending on which county you're in North Carolina. So what you're looking at is you've got more than 12,000 kids placement. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these kids are having to spend the night in the DSS office buildings because there's no homes for them to go to. And they think that the crisis kind of stemmed from COVID, and the extra care, the schooling. And let me give a shout out to the teachers, because my little one started kindergarten in the beginning of that. And, how intimidating to have to teach somebody to read, like, oh my God. Yeah. But anyway, so between that, and then you've got a heightened mental illnesses, behavioral challenges, and a lot of people aren't trained for that. So, that's how we've gotten to these 12,000 kids. Sometimes they stay in offices, like in Wake County, where I live. More than 55 children have had to spend at least one night on an air mattress in the office.
Wow.
In Mecklenburg County, which is like the Charlotte area, it's geographically bigger than Raleigh, but I don't think population it is. They too are having to sleep in these offices. Sometimes they get a hotel room, and if they have a hotel room, then two of the social workers will end up spending the night with them. In the area that we call the Triad, which is comprised of 5 or 6 counties, they have about, hold on, let me look at my notes. They've got 1,888 children that need placement.
Oh, wow.
But there's only 798 licensed homes in North Carolina, or in the Triad for that area.
It's a big discrepancy.
It's a huge discrepancy. And so what you're looking at, and this is one of the things I'll tell you, when I was going through that whole court situation in family court, it's tough. It's tough to go through that as a person, but it's also tough to watch other people go through it. And I tell you, probably the most pivotal thing that has ever happened in my life was going through that. And there was this, when we have family court in North Carolina, excuse me, you don't get your own time. You're in there with everybody else. And so I got to see a lot of the same cases, because also in North Carolina, placement is required to be, permanent placement is required to happen within 12 months. And it didn't work that way for me, and it doesn't always work. It was 18 months for me. But there was this brother and 2 brothers, and at the time they were 6 and 10, and they had been in foster, I guess, for a year. And they had been with the same foster family. Not once did I ever see the parents show up to court. But the foster parents were in their 60s. And when it came time for adoption, the foster family said, well, we think the age gap is too much. And all I could think about was, you've got this 6-year-old little boy, this 11-year-old little boy, and couldn't imagine how they felt. Like, all I could
Yeah.
think was they probably think nobody loves them. They're not worth being loved. And it crushed me. I mean, it absolutely crushed me. And ever since then, it's just been on my heart, to do something. And that's, so proud of you for how you're taking this opportunity and really maximizing awareness about the nationwide, I'm sure, problem that
Yes.
exists.
Yes. And it really does. I mean, back in, I think it was probably 15 or 20 years ago, well, probably closer to 20 years ago now, my adopted son's, follow my path here, my adopted son's biological biological dad's adoptive mom. Okay. So that's biological dad was adopted by Linda. Linda was also a foster parent. Now, Linda also fostered 14 kids at one time because
Goodness.
in the city of Omaha at that point, there was very little foster families available. So they just kept bringing her kids. At that point, they'd drop them off with a diaper and say, sorry, we got another one for you. And she'd have a sibling group of 4, and then she'd have 6 more dropped off. And then, so she was literally fostering at one time 14 kids. She did foster one of my biological son's biological dad's sister, well, be a foster sister. So, and she's still in our lives too. So it's pretty incredible to see, the need in the entire country is there very much there for foster parenting. And into adoption as well, because if you are in an older generation and you're fostering these kids when you've got the time, you may not be able to adopt them because, like you said, the age gap is pretty, and that's awful to say, but when you know that there could be health needs that are not going to be able to make you a parent that can have these kids longer than or as long as they need to be had in your house, then that should be considered. And the younger parents don't realize they can do it. They're not maybe, financially stable enough, or they're looking to, maybe to start out in their life or their career. And so they're not thinking about foster kids. So I think there could be that age range, that we could even, I don't want to say target, but assist in learning where they could have that potential to be able to impact a lot of people in a very big way.
And
So,
speaking of age, like with the crisis that we have in North Carolina, most of the kids are 12 years and older. So it's like the older they get, the harder the placement gets. And
so true, because there's a little bit more challenges with each kid. That doesn't mean that they're, negative challenges. They're just different challenges. You're in
right.
school, you're dealing with bullies, you're dealing with all kinds of things at that stage. So self-rejection, self-harm, drugs and alcohol, you name it. So,
and again, I think, like, for North Carolina, in order to become a foster parent to a child with behavioral or mental issues, there's like this extra training that you have to get.
yes.
So
Good.
sometimes I think, yeah, it's good, but then at the same time, it's like, I just don't feel like enough people are willing to take that challenge.
Sure.
And the most often question I get, it's not even really a question, it's a comment, is, I don't know how you did it. I couldn't have done it. And, surprisingly, you can. If you're put in that situation, you absolutely can.
You just do.
And
just like when you get pregnant, you find out, you're just going to do it.
Yeah, you just do it.
Yeah.
And I think cost when it comes to adoption is outrageous. And so one of the things that I am grateful for North Carolina legislation is, if you foster first and adopt out of foster care, the adoption fees, there aren't any.
That's amazing. That's
great. And as a matter of fact, also, if you adopt out of foster care, the tuition for college is also paid for.
Okay. That's
phenomenal. The state just gave a $100 stipend, $100 more to the stipend that foster families get, because I think they realize that there is a financial element to it. And sometimes we know people can get into it for the wrong reason, therefore the brilliance of the background checks. But I think it's important that people know that there's more than just adoption and fostering in North Carolina. Like, the foster care system has something called respite care. And so if foster parents need a break, or they've got to go out of town to a wedding, or they're going on a vacation. There's a volunteer option in the foster care system where people would keep the children for a weekend.
And
There's
assigned
also
people, correct?
mm-hmm,
Pre-vetted signed people, yep.
mm-hmm, and then the guardian ad litem, which for me, when we were in court, I did not have a voice, even though I was the kinship care provider. When we went to court, I didn't get on the stand. I didn't have an attorney that could speak for me, but we had a guardian ad litem who was there to represent the child in court. Right. And there were often times that one of the parties particularly would tell lies in court. And one time I stood up and I was like, and I was just, sitting back here, and I stood up and I was like, Your Honor, she's lying. And I was like, I've got text right here to prove it. And the judge started smacking her gavel thing down, and she's like, Ma'am, if you don't sit down and be quiet, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. And I was like, You're going to put me in contempt of court? Mm-hmm. And my dad almost dislocated my shoulder to yank me back down to sit down. But it was like so much of that, it just was so messy. It was just so messy. And the whole time, all I could think about is, y'all are dragging these kids everywhere. And then you wonder, when you've got teenage gangbangers or criminals or whatever, y'all created that.
100%.
Yeah. You could have stepped in and gave these kids some love.
100%.
There's so much to be done and so much that could be done. But at the end of the day, I went through my 18 months. Never, not one time was certain that I was going to get, well, at that point, legal guardianship, because it seemed to me like the court was bound and determined to give him back to his mother at the time.
Reunite
because reunification was the big word.
Yep.
And so it wasn't until the day that the judge said, that's when I knew. And girl, it's like I cried. It was just so much weight, the unknowing. So yeah.
And he's 9 now. So has he asked any questions at this point to you, or anything that makes you think that he has awareness?
He's asked questions like, when I was in your belly, and who was my doctor, and what hospital was I born in, which I could answer that one. But I mean, I have not come clean on that yet.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because on the one hand, he deserves to know the truth, but I'm so scared that the truth is going to disrupt his little life. Like, he's so happy. He's doing so well in school. He has just the most charismatic personality. And it's like, I'm just afraid to ruin that.
And there's a lot of people like that. There is a lot of people that live with that. And it's traumatic anytime there's a life shift or you find something out that you didn't expect to find out. And we as parents want to protect our kids from that.
Yeah.
But there's never a really good time.
I haven't found it.
And it takes a lot of strength from the parents. I have a different situation because my adoption was open from the beginning. I was in the room when he was born and all of the things that come along with that. But there are still things that I don't think he needs to know that may not serve him to know, just like I wouldn't tell him everything about my dad or my mom. I think that there's times where kids can be protected by the parents, and then there's times where we need to allow them to understand their own journey. And that's one of the things in our education for adoption that I actually went through. They said, at some point it becomes their story and not yours, and how you tell it is going to be different than how they tell it. And at some point also, when they're young and they ask these big questions, not to give them too much of an answer, because they're not really looking for that. You can literally say 3 words and they'll go skipping on their way and they're fine. It's just the things that they think about. So it is a challenge, and a lot of parents deal with that challenge quite a bit.
Well, I was told, I was like, when everything was done. And I've talked to everybody from the social workers to the pediatrician to, just other moms in my situation, which honestly, there's not a lot of moms my age. As a matter of fact, when I was in court, I was always the youngest. It was a lot of grandparents.
Yeah.
And now as his mom, so when we got him, my daughter was about 14. And the amount of times we would go to the store and people thought she was the mom and I was the grandma. And I was like, wait, what? No. But anyway, it's they did tell me, answer the questions that you're asked in the most simplest form. But then I was like, well, how do you know what you don't know? And then I got all hung up in that moment. It's like, so well, how does he know to ask me, like, who his real mom is, But
right.
And I anticipated more questions by this point. But so his father, who is my brother, was incarcerated. And so for 8 years, he wasn't even around. So it wasn't really a conversation. And most recently, my brother has gotten out, and my nephew has known the whole time that Mark is his dad. And I keep waiting for him to put together that his mom and dad are brother and sister and be like, what is this? What in the West Virginia have we got going here?
We have other states.
I love West Virginia. That was a joke. But
we all will pick on the states around us.
But he hasn't. And now, up until COVID, we tried really hard to maintain a relationship between he and his father by going and visiting. But then prior to COVID, they had, their restrictions and we couldn't visit.
Right.
And then they put him very far away in Louisiana, actually. And so that really made it impossible for us to go. Sure. So there was about 3 years he didn't see him. But it was such a pivotal 3 years. From 4 to 7, he had forgotten everything that happened prior to. Now, my brother called daily and twice daily, actually, to check in, see how things were going and so on. So he tried, but then just, Michael was too busy watching TV or, whatever, and didn't want to talk. And so it's been, that's been our most recent hiccup is my brother getting out and trying to ease into that relationship, which my nephew isn't always terribly agreeable to, but we're not pushing him. He said out the gate, he's like, I'm not calling him dad. And okay, that's cool. You will one day, whatever, Yeah. So it's so much easier with your own children.
It sure is.
And I'm certainly protective of my biological children, but it's just like this extra level of crazy that I have that I just got to make sure he's okay. He's not a statistic.
Correct. Yeah, it's an inner fight we have on the regular, I think. So, and even adopted kids, like my son right now, he's 16, and they go through things at 16 anyway. But then at 16, if he goes through something, I'm like, is this because he's adopted? Or is he struggling because he's got some things left over that he hasn't dealt? You always go through these things and throw them into counseling, and then you watch them struggle. And yet some of the biological kids that are 16 are doing the same thing and having the same situation. So, but we want to focus in on it because we chose this life. We chose to have them in our lives. And so when we choose to have something like that, we feel like a sense of responsibility. Not to mention we had all of this education that I wish every parent could have before going into it, that we just had to be so aware. I mean, his baby book's way better than my biological 2 children because it was full of letters from his birth mom and all the things I wanted to make sure he had, and my biological children, I'm like, well, it's just me. Sorry, you're going to get a letter from me anyway. So I'm like, whatever. But, and not to say that I have any feeling any different from any of my kiddos, which that's an interesting thing. I think people get really weird about, well, I'm not going to have the same feeling for that kid that I would if I had my own. that is not the
Couldn't
case
be further from
at
the
all.
truth.
So I feel like a lot of people have that misconception. And even in a foster situation, you put everything into it and you feel that sense of responsibility for that person and that child. And I feel like there's no difference between my kiddos. And I met an adoptive mom one time at a wedding that I was shooting, and she impacted me so much. She had like 5 adopted kids. And one of the things everybody talked about around her and about her was that she would say, once you're mine, you're mine. And I just thought that that was just such a
Yeah.
beautiful way of saying, I'm your mom. Get over it. I mean, once you're mine, you're mine. And it was just like an enveloping conversation that she was able to have with each of her kids. Say, sorry, you're stuck with me. And I mean, Seth, my biological son has never said these things, but Seth has said, oh, well, you're going to get rid of me, or you're going to, like, have you thought about giving me back, or, whatever. Like, that's not even crossing my
Yeah.
mind. I would be just as hard on my biological son as I am being on you right now. So it's discipline. It's not necessarily rejection. So it's hard
Right.
for them to see that variation. So it's all interesting to me, and we put so much into
Yeah.
it. I think people don't realize that's not the case when it comes to feelings. The differences isn't there. So
No, and it's it's the day he was born. I, I I went to the hospital. I was there the day he was born. I wasn't present for the birth, but he was my nephew, and just looking at his eyes, I had just this enormous amount of aunt aunt love.
yeah.
I call him Aunt Kim, not aunt. But
Uh-huh.
anyway,
Uh-huh.
I just had this Aunt Kim, and I knew in that moment, the first time I held him, like I would be just as protective over him
Mhm.
as I am my biological children. I didn't know I'd actually have to exercise
Yeah.
that flex, but here we
Beast
are.
mode, yes.
Yeah,
You're a very protective person anyway. I know that about you,
yeah,
especially the first time you met my current husband. You said to him, if you ever hurt her, I will come after you. You said that to
yeah.
him in Chicago, and I
I
will never forget it. I'm like,
I love
so
hard.
you do, and I think that that's so key. Especially with your kiddo, he's gonna know, and your daughter too. He's gonna know that you are 100% there and in for him, and no matter what, you're there for him. And I think that that's so amazing, and I'm proud of you for being such a big voice. I know that when I started this, you were like, count me in for whatever
Yep.
you need, and I 100% know that when we link arms and we're together, and everybody comes together for these type of things, it is amazing what we can do. So I'm excited to see kind of where this journey takes us. Now, when you have gone through that system and you're going through this project, of adopting your child, was the project to put him in the adoption scenario with you harder than you expected or easier, considering you went through the guardianship item?
It's way easier because I have clients and I have friends that have adopted, and I've had friends that have had to go out of the country
Mm-hmm.
to adopt, and I hear the stories of the paperwork and the paperwork and the paperwork and the money and the money and the
Yeah.
money. And I could see where people would be so disheartened over time to just throw their
And
hands up.
put up.
So
Yes.
in comparison, mine was a breeze
Mm-hmm. That's
compared to,
amazing.
because like I said, in the state of North Carolina, adopting out of foster care
They
is paid for.
help you.
Mm-hmm.
So in Nebraska, I went through it's actually a charity organization out here called the Nebraska Children's Home Society. And so they assisted in the home study, they assisted in placement, they assisted in all of that, which was a beautiful thing. So we were responsible, obviously, for always giving back to that charity if we could, um, which is a lifelong thing once you do that. A lot of people poured their, say, like everything into this company because it's amazing. But that doesn't mean we paid anything for this child, because I noticed that it became, when I researched it online, even 15, 16 years ago, maybe 17 years ago now, that it felt like I was shopping for kids. Like, I'm like, okay, so how does one get started in adoption? How does one get started in searching for, a person that's, because for every one child born, there's over 40 families waiting to adopt. There is not that in the foster care system. So there is these like big gaps that we need to look at. We just had here in Omaha, one of the babies was left at the fire. We have a fire station box that they
Mm-hmm.
can leave children in. when they're born. And we had one just happen 3 nights ago. And why does those things happen when there's so many things that they can be putting in? It's fear, it's scared. And it's the same with adoptive parents. We didn't know I didn't know where to look. You go to these charities, but then you go to these organizations, you look online, like you put it out there by yourself. But a fostering situation is a great way to get involved with the community, change lives, and maybe push in a direction that will lead you to have an amazing relationship and adopt the child that you're fostering. So I think that's a great way to do it.
It is. And I think now is more so than ever in my adult life is time to have that conversation about options, because we don't have the boxes like at the fire department, because North Carolina is, you can take it to the baby to the hospital, wherever, a safe environment. Somebody could bring a baby to me and they wouldn't be held legally. They wouldn't get in trouble legally. Yes. So we don't have to have those boxes because that opportunity is there. But when you're looking at, there was every age of a mother when I was going through, and I, honest to God, just believe that there's just so much that they don't know. Yeah. They don't know that there's this option and that option and that option. So providing a place, a way, an organization, or something to just say, hey, here's your options, and you're not going to get in trouble, and make it a safer place for people to do, rather than leaving them in a trash can.
Yes, 100%. Or taking the alternative route, which would mean eliminating. Like, we have so many people that will to come to the rescue of these kiddos, and we just really think that it's important to have that ability to say, hey, there's people out there, let's help them out. So
there is. And I tell you, and I know I'm spending a lot of conversation on fostering, but that was
great,
the biggest bulk of my experience, because I mean, I was literally just watching the news one night, and there was an article about how many children don't have a bed to sleep in. And when I looked into it further and saw that this was a current trend, I thought, gosh, something's got to be done. And I'm happy that people want to care for dogs and cats, and the Sheryl Crow song that makes you cry every time those commercials come on.
Yeah.
But we have organizations for adoption and stuff like that in North Carolina. But what we don't have is we don't have support from the alternatives, meaning foster care, respite care, things of that nature. And I think that's the gap we need to fill. And I feel like if enough people knew, if adoption is something they're looking into, going the route,
that's a great route
in North Carolina, because I know this how you can do it affordably with support and financial support, services support, all these things to give these children a better opportunity than what they're going to have otherwise. To think that there's a 10-year-old little girl somewhere that, I don't know, it just tears my nerves up. I can't hardly stand it.
We feel it because we have them in our lives. We have these kiddos. We feel it, and it's hard when you start digging in to not feel it. So if I would ask, if there's one thing that you want to communicate to our viewership today about what our conversation was, or some future call to actions, what would you say?
God, a lot, but I think the biggest message, just find it in your heart to be something for somebody that otherwise they're not going to have that opportunity. What does that something look like? It could be adoption. It could be fostering. It could be respite care. It could be the guardian ad litem. And again, guardian ad litem is the person who goes in during these situations and kind of just, looks at when a visitation is happening, and then they go and they report that interaction or whatever to the court of law. And, so there's so many things that people could do. It's not just adoption. It's not just being a foster parent. It's doing something for the greater good, because there's nothing more precious on this planet than a child. you know, a little human. They
Mm-hmm.
need us,
They
and we need to
absolutely do.
be there for them.
Next month is Adoption Awareness Month, and on November 9th is actually World Adoption Day. So I've actually had my viewership, we have a call to action as well, so that we want everyone to wear and post white at least once or
Okay.
twice, especially on November 9th, to bring awareness to adoption. And we can even include foster care because it's so closely related. So make a post, wear white that day. It's November 9th, World Adoption Day, and the whole month is going to be dedicated to putting out information about adoption and even foster care. So I have a good friend of mine, her name is Ashley Ray, and she's actually a foster care mom herself, and went on to adopt her kiddos. And she has a program called Be a Foster, and so it's a great thing. So we can link up with her. But yeah, so wear white and post a picture, and we can, bring awareness to adoption and tie in that foster family and foster cares. Any organizations that you want to tag, definitely do that because we're all closely related and we're all connected through adoption. And I absolutely loved our time. Thank you, Kim. We've known each other for like 20 years
I
or
know, it's
something like
nuts.
crazy. So we
We
know
were
each other before
12 when we
kids.
met each other.
Yeah, we've been educators all across the country together. We've been in Chicago. I mean, we've done so many things. Dallas. So it's been you have been such a great friend to me. And you've always been somebody I always look forward to seeing. And I so appreciate you coming on and being my first guest. And
Well, the honor was mine.
uh,
And honestly, you know, it's how we met in education, and here we are still educating, just in a different
oh
capacity,
yeah,
you
so
know. And I
when we find the passion.
think, well, and I think that, you know, if we look at the divine line, you know, that might have been what the prep was going moving forward, you know, in God's
100%.
time. That's, you know, he knew that one day we were going to be in a situation to share this information, and
Yeah,
that gave us the training to have the conversation without being so tongue tied.
totally. Yeah, we've had a lot of education in how to talk to people.
But,
So.
you know, having friends like you, and this is one thing I would say, you know your friends, and don't be afraid to reach out to your friends, because I know when I was in the beginnings of this, I needed to know that I wasn't crazy. I needed to know that, and like, you just were such a pivotal person to me in that journey, because really you were the one I knew the most about what this looks like. And so I appreciate you, and
As I was
I look
going through it
forward to see
myself.
what you do.
Oh, girl. Well, I'm excited. Again, thank you very much for being on here. And I'm going to try to post this now so that I don't lose it, because this was great information. And if anyone wants to reach out to Kim and has any questions about foster cares, or if you're in North Carolina and have some situations that you want to talk to her about, I'm sure she would be a big, huge, loving arms to wrap around you and help
Sure
you out.
will.
So, all right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. And Kim, you're the best. I love you, girl.
Love you too, babe.
All right,
Bye.
I'll let you jump off, and then I will see if I can save it.
Okay, now how do I
Bye.
do that?
I'm not sure. Let's maybe
Okay.
do the X on top, and
Okay,
we'll see
let's
if
do
it
the
works.
X. Bye, friends.
Bye.